Morning, everybody. My name's Dave Kerber, and we're going to talk about getting ready to code and having your development environment up and running quickly and easily. Got a lot to go through, so let's get going. All right, my name is Dave Kerber. I have a wonderful wife waiting for me in Omaha, cheering me on, and I've got a couple daughters and a son on the way this year, so very excited about that. And there's some other information about me as well. All right, so let's talk about the problem. The problem is when you get started at a company or you get started on a slide presentation and the screen disappears, it causes problems. Okay, we're just going to talk through then. When you get started at a company and you're trying to get up and going, or you get started on a new project, trying to get set up, or even if you just, heaven forbid, buy a new laptop, it's hard and it's difficult to get that up to speed. You know, a lot of times you've got undocumented dependencies, things you installed 2 years ago that your project depends on, but you don't remember installing it. Nobody remembers installing it until you see some arcane, confusing error message. You do some Googling, and then you go, oh yes, we have to install X. So, you know, we've all been through that process. If you do have the dependencies listed, sometimes it's not clear how to install them. Particularly when you're using like the Ubuntu world, you've got packages for things that don't work or are out of date, or oh no, you have to download it from this site, or no, you have to run make with this confusing set of arguments behind it to get that to compile. Or if you're lucky enough to have documentation, often it ends up being pretty bad. I did a Java consulting gig where there was a 30 or 40 page setup guide, and they were thrilled. I mean, they were elated with me when I was ready to start coding after just 2 days of configuring my machine. So yeah, super fun. So how do we solve that? We already love virtualization for our servers. It makes things really nice. We all love Amazon Web Services. We can create stuff fast and quick. If you own your own hardware, you get better utilization of it. You can create cheap environments to test with and play with and do whatever you need to. If you're upgrading, you back it up. If the upgrade makes everything explode, you just revert to the backend, right? Super simple. Everybody loves it. And if you've got a really great infrastructure team, you are automatically creating and destroying servers as needed, and they're configured and they're ready with a push of a button. We've got a sysadmin who, when his company does maintenance, his job is to wake up, check the email, and see that everything went okay. So why can't we do that with our development environments? So we're going to talk about that. When I started in the Mac world, actually, my employer did a lot of stuff in Windows, so I started with virtualization there and really, really enjoyed it. And then when I decided to go into a consulting practice, I decided to carry that forward with me. It was very basic, crude virtualization at that time. We just had full-size VirtualBox images. So it had Ubuntu with the desktop and the GUI and everything loaded on it. And it worked pretty well. So some benefits of that were it was really easy to onboard somebody and say, hey, you're going to work on this project, here's an external hard drive, download this image, hook it up, push play, bam, you're ready to go. 10 or 15 minutes of disk time, and that's about it, and you're done. Didn't need documentation. The documentation, let's copy the file, push play. Great. Your computer becomes just the delivery mechanism, which is really, really useful. When I decided to leave my employer, my last day on the job, my MacBook died. And I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? This is the only way I feed my family now, and I'm not going to be able to work. So I go to the Apple Store, and they say, yeah, we can fix this, no problem. We just have to send it to Texas for a few days. Awesome. So I'm thinking, I asked them about their return policy, which is great. And I said, well, give me your cheapest MacBook Pro. Okay. So I got a MacBook Pro and copied all my virtual machines over. Luckily, I had those backed up on an external drive. And within a couple hours, I was back to work. That's phenomenal. Plus, my wife got a lovely MacBook Pro out of it, so everybody wins, right? I've gone through some other issues too. I had a hard drive crash. Had to wait for all that to get fixed and repaired, but I didn't lose anything because all those environments were backed up. The consistency of development environment is also really nice. You know, when you're in that situation, you don't have to know how to install something on a Mac and on Linux and on a PC if you have people that use those. So it's great to just only have one environment to worry about having it working correctly. There were some bad things too. It used a lot of disk space, a ton of disk space. A normal size Ubuntu image would be at least 6 to 7 gigs. So it uses up a lot of space. Hard to share those when you're not sitting next to somebody. Upgrades are tricky. I had at one point like 10 or 14 Ubuntu virtual machines. So when they came out with a new distro, because I didn't know how to recreate the environment that was in them, I had to upgrade them all individually. That sucks. Sometimes you share a little too much information. Very early on in this, I'd give somebody a copy of the VM, say get to work, all right, they get to work, they're going. And then I'd see a commit notification from me for code I didn't write. So I had inadvertently shared my SSH keys and my git config. And even once I forgot to log out of Gmail. So, that's not the best setup. And the context switching was hard. Key bindings just between your host machine and your guest machine. It just reeks with your brain and just causes a lot of problems. So, and the code lived in the virtual machine. So if I wanted to peek at code, I had to fire up a full virtual machine just to look at it. I could have made a separate copy, but anyway. So that wasn't too great. So now we're going to talk about what we did after that. About 6 months ago, we went just full in with Vagrant. And it's gone really well since then. So what is Vagrant? Vagrant is a way with some simple configuration files to set up a virtual machine to do just about anything you want. And we're going to go through that in pretty good detail here. Works with either VirtualBox or VMware. The VMware is fairly new. And you're able to configure those machines with shell scripts, Puppet, or Chef. So, all right, so the way it works is there's two basic things you need to know about. One is boxes. A box is essentially a virtual machine image and some metadata about it. And that's your base machine that you start up whenever you fire up a Vagrant VM. So it'll take that box, clone it, and then start up a VM running that, which is really great. So it's your template that you can use over and over and over again to create lots of different virtual machines. And then the Vagrant file is just a Ruby file that you tell Vagrant what you want to have happen to your virtual machine when you fire that up. To install it, you just download Vagrant. They've got a binary install for all the major platforms, works really well. And VirtualBox, again, same thing. Those are all open source and they have great binaries. I think this is the kind of stuff they were saying, please don't download this on their Wi-Fi. I know the VirtualBox download is fairly large, so wait on that. All right, so assuming you have VirtualBox and Vagrant installed, we're going to build a VM. So Vagrant box add is the command. So Vagrant automatically adds this command to your terminal, the Vagrant command. So you say Vagrant box add to add a box. You give it a nickname. In this case, that's what I'm using, Precise64, because that's the version of Ubuntu it is. And a URL, and it'll download it from that URL. So this is where you can get that. Make a directory for your virtual machine. Go ahead and go into that directory. Normally, you would run Vagrant init, which would go ahead and create a Vagrant file for you. It's a big, long thing, about 150 lines with lots and lots of comments and commented out examples of how to do different things. We're not going to do that in this example. We're going to go ahead and build one from scratch. But if you're trying this out, I would encourage you to do the Vagrant init and kind of see all the options they provide. So we're going to go ahead and just edit the Vagrant file directly. OK, so this is the smallest possible Vagrant configuration file you can have. You just have a configure block. So you just say Vagrant configure. The 2 is the version of the API, so 2 corresponds with Vagrant 1.1. You tell it what box to use. So this is the nickname I gave that box when I downloaded it. And you give it a URL. So if you share this configuration with someone that doesn't have that box installed by that nickname, Vagrant will go ahead and download it for them from that URL and fire up the virtual machine. So that's it. We have a working virtual machine that we can now SSH into and use. I'm going to show that a little bit. Can you see the terminal OK? No.
Bigger font.
Okay. How about now?
Better.
Better? OK. So here I just went into a directory that has that. You can see I had 166 gigs of disk space free, and I went ahead and ran Vagrant up. And if I look now, I have 165 gigs free, so it took that box, copied it, that's what's using up that disk space. We can go ahead and log into that box. So here we are, we're in a virtual machine now. We can do anything we want. Let's just go ahead and delete the home directory. Something stupid and unrecoverable, perhaps. I tried this. but I just didn't have the guts to do that in a presentation. And if I screw that up, I am hosed. So anyway, we did that. So let's go ahead and leave the virtual machine. Oh, real quick. You can see you're the Vagrant user now inside that virtual machine. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the virtual machine and trash it. So it's going to make me make sure I want to do that. Destroy the VM. It's gone. If I look, I've got that disk space back. So I think that's pretty amazing, right? With 4 lines of configuration code, I was able to fire up a virtual machine, use it. I can do anything I want with that thing, abuse it, try out new things, test stuff. And when I'm done with it, I run 1 line and it's gone. Any trace of that thing ever existing has disappeared. So I think that's pretty awesome. Okay. So we're going to go through a lot of different configuration options here. So we're going to tweak just some settings on the box. We're going to tell VirtualBox how much RAM and how many CPUs to give that virtual machine. So 2 CPUs and 512 megs of RAM is more than enough when you're running a headless VM. I've never had to exceed that. So. Okay, how do you get your code on there? Vagrant has the idea of synced folders, which if you've ever used VirtualBox or Parallels or VMware Fusion or any of those, it's the same thing as like shared folders. So it's a folder on your host machine that gets shared with your virtual machine at a specific location. So I'm sharing my home folder with the virtual machine at /host folder. So if I were to ls my home folder on the host machine, that's what I'd see at the top. And if I were to look at that on the VM, I see the exact same thing. Okay, so how do we talk to it? We use port forwarding. So port forwarding, what that does is it takes a port on your host machine, your laptop, and forwards anything through that or anything sent to that port onto a specified port in your virtual machine. So in this instance, I have taken port 3000 on my host machine and routed it to port 3000 on my virtual machine. So with this setup, and I'll show this at the end, I can just go to localhost 3000 in Safari, and it will route all that traffic to my virtual machine. Okay, so we've got that installed, or we've got that set up, but really how do we configure this box? How do we get what we want on it, the juicy, meaty stuff? And that we use the different configuration options. The simplest and by far the most straightforward is just the shell configuration, so you just use bash shell scripting. Second is Puppet. So Puppet's an automated configuration management software. It's, in my opinion, kind of oriented towards systems guys, but it's great. It's all based on Ruby, and you can do pretty much anything you want to a machine through Puppet. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to have some examples on Puppet. Chef is another option that does the same thing. It's also based on Ruby. They both have huge communities, and I'm sure if you talk to someone who's familiar with those, they could tell you all the nuances and difference between them. But I'm going to talk about how to use Puppet today. All right, so the first thing we're going to go through is just the simple shell provisioning. Very, very straightforward. You just go inline, you say, in this block, I want to provision this with a shell script, and you just make an inline script, and you say, here's the script. So just like that, we can install Vim and Git, switch to the Vagrant user, and tell Git that you want to use your color UI. So boom, setup, done, ready to go. If you don't like inline shell scripts, that's fine, especially if you reach a certain level of complexity. You definitely don't want to do that. So you just, in this example, make a shell script next to the Vagrant file, put your contents in there, and then give it a path to the shell script you want executed in your virtual machine when it's being provisioned. Okay, now Puppet. So use Puppet. I'm going to go through some Puppet examples, and you'll get the idea as we go along and how Puppet works. So you say, I want to provision this with Puppet. You tell it where your manifest files live. So the manifests are what kind of the entry point into a Puppet configuration. And then you give it the name of the manifest file you want to run. So base.pp is pretty standard, so that's what we went with. Okay, so in that file, inside our manifest folder, we're going to do the exact same thing we did in the shell scripting example, just in Puppet. We're going to install Vim and Git. So you just say, package, here's the packages I want you to make sure are installed, and just make sure they're there. And Puppet does it. It's pretty awesome. And then we're going to execute a command. So the exec argument is basically just execute something on the command line. So you give it the command to execute. You tell it who you want to execute as, where you want it to execute it, and then you give it any requirements that are necessary before it's executed. So in this case, we want to make sure that the package git is installed before we run git config. Okay, so we got that stuff, but how do we get Ruby on here? We're going to talk about some modules that are available. So modules are just groups of Puppet code, reusable chunks of it. Typically keep those in the modules folder in your setup. We're going to talk specifically about the RVM module, which lets you install, it installs RVM for you, and then you can use Puppet to install any Rubies or gems or anything like that you want. It was written by a great guy in Texas. He's done a phenomenal job on this thing. It's pretty amazing. So that first URL is his project on GitHub. The second one is I did fork it and make a slight change to it that I haven't asked him to merge in yet. And basically what happened is the dependencies are changing so fast that the module hasn't quite kept up with what those dependencies are. So in my fork of it, all I did was tell RVM to automatically install any dependencies that are necessary to get Ruby going. So you just make a modules directory, and I recommend using a git submodule to get that going. So you just run that command, and then in your module/RVM will be that RVM module. So here's how we use that. First thing I want to do is just run an apt-get update. We've run into some issues in the past where those indexes get out of date and it doesn't know where to find a specified package, so we just tell it to update so we don't have to worry about those problems. Do a normal Puppet configuration like we did on the last one, but we have to tell it where the modules are, right? So we tell it it's in the modules folder. And then we update our manifest, say include RVM. So just by that include, RVM will be installed on your machine. Yep. And then down here we say, well, we want to make sure that the Vagrant user is part of the RVM group so that he can do all the RVM things he needs to do without having to mess around with sudo or anything like that. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to have a separate Puppet configuration for actually installing Ruby and things. One of my big things with Vagrant is you have to be able to check it out, run Vagrant up, and you've got full working machine the first time. So the way the RVM module is set up, they recommend you install RVM, and then you put inside of an if block installing Ruby and your gems, and execute the provision twice. And I'm just not on board with that. I don't like to have to remember things, and I don't like to have to remind people to remember things. So we're going to launch Puppet once. The first time it installs RVM, and the second time in this RVM manifest file, we're going to install our Rubies and our gems. So we check if RVM's installed, because that's what they recommend to do. And we just say, install Ruby. And here's the version of Ruby I want installed. Make sure it's there. And go ahead and make it the default in RVM so that it just works out of the box as soon as you log in. Oh, there we go. All right. And then we say, well, here's some gems we want as well. So because we are replacing the system Ruby, we have to reinstall the Puppet gem. Otherwise, when you try to provision again, it says, I don't know where Puppet is. So we install Puppet, and you just give it the gem set and the gem name you want installed. Again, make sure it's present. And make sure Ruby's installed before you install the gem, right? We also install Bundler. And on all of our installations, we also install Mail Catcher. If you're not familiar with it, it's a really great gem for testing email. Recommend you check it out. OK, we have Ruby installed. Isn't that great? Just like that. Just a few lines of configuration. So what if we want to do something custom, something different? You can create your own Puppet modules. They're not that complex. And we're going to walk through creating one. So we're going to make one for Postgres. So in our modules folder, we're going to make a Postgres folder. And inside that, we're going to make files and manifests. And we're going to go ahead and create this file. So init.pp, when you include a Puppet module, this file automatically gets loaded, and it reads through that to figure out what needs to happen inside that module. We're going to create a class called PG, which matches the name of the module in the folder structure. So that's a convention that's there. We're going to go ahead and create the Postgres user, and we're going to give them a password of password. Remember, this is for development. Don't use this Puppet module in production, right? So do that, and then we just verify that those libraries are installed. So we install Postgres, and we install a development library that we can use to compile any of our gems that rely on that. Also in there, because of the way Postgres does its host-based authentication, we don't want to use the default configuration. We want to swap it out, so we just specify that file. So right here is the file I want to replace. And here's where the file comes from, the new destination, or the file to take to override that. This is a Puppet URL. Basically what it's saying is, inside the modules, inside the Postgres module, look for a file called pg_hpa.conf. On the file system outside the box, it actually lives in modules pg files, and then the file name. And we want to make sure Postgres is installed and the Postgres user exists before we do that, and make sure it's owned by the Postgres user. So now you can start working. That's it. You've got Ruby, you've got Postgres. On 90% of our projects, that's really all you need to get started and get going. But first time I did this, I'm like, great, okay, rake db create, let's get started. Oh, drat. Fails, got some weird error, wasn't sure what happened, did some Googling, found out I had to change the encoding on my template database. Okay, no problem. Change that, everything works, right? But again, that's a step you don't want to have to remember, right? You don't want to have to write that down, you just want to make it automatically happen so nobody has to think about it again. So let's do that. So I wrote a SQL script to alter that default database, and then I go ahead and execute that on the command line. Just use the Postgres command line interface to execute that SQL file. It updates the template database, and you're ready to go. Also, you want to make sure that file exists before you execute that. And that's it. So it's working, and everything's good. But there's a bit of a problem, and again, this is one of my big points is, Vagrant should work out of the box the first time. You shouldn't have to do anything. So depending on your workflow, like the first time I did this, the workflow, it worked great. I did everything, ran Vagrant up, it provisioned, it worked, it was great. But then if you destroy the virtual machine and recreate it from scratch, it fails. That command updating doesn't work. So found out it was, I was updating the HBA configuration, but I wasn't activating it because Postgres has to restart before that starts taking effect. So I'm like, okay, crap, now I have to add a restart to Postgres. But figured out. So we say, execute restarting Postgres. Here's the command to restart it. It's a simple, restart a service. And before we run the command to update the default database, we restart Postgres. So that's it. Okay, you're ready to go. So just with that configuration, you can start building apps with Ruby and Postgres inside a virtual machine, completely ready. So now that you've got that done, you've got that all figured out, you want to share it with your team, right? Don't want to just keep all that to yourself. What you want to do is in your git ignore, you want to make sure you ignore the Vagrant directory. That's where it stores a lot of metadata about the specific machine that was created on your machine. So like in VirtualBox, it stores the UUID of the hard disk that was created. You don't want to share that stuff, so make sure you ignore that. If you use git submodules like I do, go ahead and initialize them for your folks that are copying this. Again, it was just one of those things, I get people going, hey Dave, it's broken, it says RVM Module's not there. Oh crap. So just put it in there. We've got the full power of Ruby, so just execute that on the command line when they load the Vagrant file, and you're good to go. Also, not everything's going to be the same from computer to computer, so you want to make sure some of that stuff is configurable. What we decided to do at our office was just go with a convention of, you're going to have in your home folder a vagrant setup.rb file. And in there, you're going to create an object called userconfig, and it's going to respond to the data_dir method in one way or another. This is just the way I did it. So I give that, and then in the Vagrant file, I check to see if that file exists. If it does, great, let's load it. If it doesn't, let's go ahead and put a default config in place and just set it to the home folder. And then inside your Vagrant block, rather than having like a hard-coded string of this is the folder we're going to share with the VM, you just use whatever that user has configured and put a reasonable default in there. So it's really great. You don't have to be like, oh yeah, hand edit that file because your username is not the same as mine, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Give you an idea of how far you can take this, and we could go a lot farther than this actually too. We use this for what folder do you share. My name and email automatically get put into git config, and my SSH keys automatically get copied over, so I can use git and push and pull from outside the VM or inside the VM. It doesn't matter. I don't have to remember where I'm at or where I'm supposed to do it. The startup script is pretty fun too. What that does is it'll take whatever file you specify there, put it in your profile.d on your machine. so that it automatically loads every time you log into that machine. So if you have a list of aliases or shortcuts or things you like to have in your profile, you can put that in there, and then that will automatically get added to all of your virtual machines that you create through Vagrant. Okay, let's do a quick demo. So close that. Let's blow this up. Okay, so I've got the virtual machine config we just walked through. That's what I got up here. So I'm going to go ahead and log into that. Okay, there it is. And I'm going to go to this folder, RMW. And this is a Rails app. And I've got the same Rails app up here in RubyMine, my preferred editor. And you can see on the top here, it's the same folder on the host machine. So let's go ahead and fire this up. We've got the port forwarding on here, so I should be able to. Nothing yet. Got an error, great. Okay, so you can tell by watching the logs that I'm definitely talking to my virtual machine. And it says we love Ruby Midwest, but you know, times change quick. And we just learned about a shiny new thing. So we're going to say we love Vagrant instead, and ta-da, it updates. So just like that, we've got our virtual machine set up, running our Rails app with Postgres. We're editing it in our host machine, and our environment is real quick. Build it, it's done. When you're done with it, shut it down, throw it away, destroy it. Ready to go. Yeah. And in an environment like ours, where we're doing consulting, where we've got 5 or 6 or 7 projects you might be working on, different databases, different versions of those databases, Redis, different versions of Redis, Javas, Gradle, all the different things you need. It's great to have all of that isolated from each other so you don't have to figure out how to make those things all play nice with each other. Okay, so the good parts of Vagrant. All the other benefits of virtualization in terms of the easy sharing and kind of abstracting away the need for a specific machine. Uses very little disk space, super easy to share. The Git configurations are very tiny. It's cheap and easy to create and destroy environments. So if you just want to test something out or do something crazy, you can do that and try it out. And, install anything you want and not worry about it messing up your machine or causing problems or anything like that. You have executable documentation of your configuration requirements. That is huge. That's how you keep up documentation up to date. And no context switching while you're editing and going back and forth. So that's wonderful. A couple things I don't quite like about it yet. Getting the configuration right was really hard to do. Some of the Puppet stuff, I had a little trouble with figuring out. I think the documentation is written for systems guys, not necessarily for programmers. But I was able to kind of muddle my way through it and figure it out. Also, because I am so adamant that you should be able to have nothing and start it up and have it all work correctly, that feedback cycle can get pretty long, right? So depending on what you're installing, you can be installing a lot of things and making sure it all works right. But it's definitely worth it when it's done. Man, when it works, it just works great. Things do change fast. As Rubyists, we all know that, right? Things move quickly and stuff breaks, right? So we initially started down this road. We went all in 6 months ago. A few months into it, our setups just didn't work anymore. So we had to change things and adjust. And sometimes the disk speed is a bit of a problem when you're serving stuff from your VM through shared folders or synced folders. Particularly in VirtualBox. If you have a Rails app with a lot of assets, you'll see a large amount of time spent just serving those assets. So we use NFS for our disk sharing. That helps a lot. We also run some gems to kind of speed up that process. And I'm going to be looking at VMware as well to see how that addresses that problem. So, okay, so we know how to do it. We can go forward and conquer and take this thing over. So I recommend you check out the Vagrant documentation. It's amazing. It's really well done, really well written, great documentation. That GitHub URL is what I just walked you through creating. So it's a whole Vagrant setup. It installs Ruby 1.9.3. It installs Postgres 9.1. Sets it all up so you can start using it. You can clone this and in a couple commands have a machine up and running. So there's no reason why everybody here, by the time the weekend isn't over, couldn't download this on a different Wi-Fi network and create a virtual machine configuration that you can take back with you and share and use to get up and working. So that's it for me. Thank you. We've got no time for questions. So thank you very much.